Johnson's decision to escalate our involvement in the Vietnam War is considered by many modern historians to be one of the single worst decisions in American history, and I agree. Sorry, LBJ, my Central Texan loyalty can only extend so far. Now, I'm possibly more sympathetic than I should be, especially because I've seen a lot of evidence that Johnson was trusting and following the advice of his defense secretary, Robert McNamara, who had earned his credentials by advising JFK on the blockade strategy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a really good one. If you go to the LBJ Presidential Museum in Austin, you can listen to phone calls and conversations throughout the conflict. And as someone who has heard a lot of them, it's clear to me that LBJ wasn't a war-hungry nationalist. He wasn't Goldwater, proposing we nuke our way out of trouble. He understood the complexity and the potential nightmare of the Vietnam War, but he just at the time didn't seem to see another way out of it. By all accounts, President Johnson had his eyes firmly on his domestic agenda. He wanted to make his great society a reality, and the continuing issues in Southeast Asia were like a frustrating reality that he would rather not have had to deal with. It's totally human to try to wish a problem away and take the advice of the person telling you that everything can be fixed with just a few more troops. But ultimately, the blame falls on LBJ, as it should, because he had just as many advisors telling him not to get further into the conflict. So how did we go from a few thousand military advisors in Vietnam under Eisenhower and Kennedy to, well, apocalypse now? I'm going to really oversimplify. There are two key events in the Vietnam War that are essentially bookends to LBJ's presidency as it relates to Vietnam: the Gulf of Tonkin, and then later the Tet Offensive. And we love alliteration here at Anti-Social Studies to help us keep track of a narrative, and the two T's of Vietnam do not disappoint. Well, they're really disappointing, but for this purpose, they're helpful. First up, in 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin Incident. At this point, the US had military advisors in South Vietnam, but no active duty troops. We did, however, have a naval presence across East Asia to protect our new allies of Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and South Vietnam from the looming communist threats. On August 2nd, 1964, a destroyer, the USS Maddox, was patrolling the waters when it was fired on by 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats. There was a small engagement in which a US aircraft, which came to support, was damaged, and 4 North Vietnamese sailors were killed. Obviously, tensions were high when 2 days later, the Maddox, now joined by another destroyer, saw radar and sonar evidence of another attack. They opened fire and reported back to base that they were being attacked by North Vietnamese ships. The only problem? There weren't any North Vietnamese ships. No one was attacking them. The captain of the Maddox pretty quickly reported the mistake, but the NSA had already sent off its report to LBJ, who concluded quickly that both attacks were real and the US needed to take quick action. Uh-oh. Okay, wait, I have so many questions, and so should you. For one, if we were so ready to get more involved, then why was the first attack not enough? And then how did we just accidentally make up a whole fake attack that never happened? So let's clarify. The first attack was real. North Vietnamese boats fired torpedoes on a US destroyer, but the government failed to mention a few key points. For one, the US fired first. The USS Maddox fired a warning shot at the North Vietnamese boats, which could have been misinterpreted by them as an attack. And second, the US was 3 to 4 nautical miles inside North Vietnamese naval territory, where they weren't supposed to be. Johnson had actually ordered our ships to test the North Vietnamese resolve on maintaining the boundaries that they had set. Basically, we were seeing how aggressively they were going to defend this line in the water that they had established around their coast. Oh yeah, and this test by the USS Maddox coincided with South Vietnamese coastal raids. So from the North Vietnamese perspective, this was a coordinated attack between the South Vietnamese and the US. Think about it this way. Imagine if during the US Civil War, the British, who were considering siding with the South to get their cotton supply back on the market, by the way, had sent massive ships to patrol our northern coastline. And imagine if those British warships had crossed the US naval boundary around, let's say, New York City to test and see if we would use our ships to defend ourselves. And then they fire a warning shot at us in our territory. And at the same time, the Confederacy was raiding the southern coastline with weapons and resources given to them by the British. Is it so crazy to think that we would have fired back? You know that we would have. As for the second fictional attack, we have to remember that ships were often fighting enemies they couldn't even see, right? Remember the massive Battle of Midway during World War II. No enemy ships were ever inside of each other. And with this second engagement happening in the middle of the night, the US ships relied heavily on radar and sonar to detect an enemy. So essentially, the US ships were picking up radio signals that sounded like an attack was coming, and they saw something on their radar and sonar that they believed were North Vietnamese ships. For around 2 hours, the US fired on these targets, trying to find the enemy until ultimately they determined that nothing was there. But the US ships were also in constant communication with other government entities during this alleged attack. And those groups were sending reports back to DC about fighting with the North Vietnamese. Now, the captain of the Maddox sent a report soon after the one-sided skirmish ended saying, quote, "Review of action makes many reported contacts and torpedoes fired appear doubtful. Freak weather effects on radar and over-eager sonar men may have accounted for many reports. No actual visual sightings by Maddox suggest complete evaluation before any further action taken." But Johnson took the combination of the real attack 2 days earlier, plus the erroneous reports of the second attack, and interrupted national television just before midnight to announce the dramatic attacks, plural, by the aggressive North Vietnamese. To the American audience at home, we were peacefully minding our own business in international waters, protecting Asia from the communist threat, when North Vietnamese ships approached and fired on us unprovoked. It's kind of like back in 1898 when we were peacefully minding our business in Havana Harbor. Why were we there again? When the dastardly Spanish blew up the USS Maine. With the combination of the heightened tension of the Cold War, the actual skirmish days earlier, and the new media of television, we were effectively at war 6 days later. Now, we weren't actually at war because, well, the US actually hasn't formally declared war since World War II, but Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave LBJ unprecedented power to use conventional military force in Vietnam without needing a formal declaration of war. The key part of the resolution reads that the Congress approves and supports the determination of the President as Commander-in-Chief to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. Similar to the Korean War being called a police action by UN forces, the Vietnam War was framed as a presidential action sanctioned by Congress to defend and prevent future attacks against US forces in the region. We weren't declaring war on North Vietnam, we were just letting the commander-in-chief do what he needed to do to defend our troops abroad. But it's that last clause that made everyone real nervous, to prevent further aggression. This was a turning point in American military history. We were now acknowledging publicly that the US military's purpose was not just to defend US territory. It wasn't just to contain outright communist attacks and invasions abroad. It was also meant to anticipate future attacks and prevent them from happening. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution is terrible for dozens of reasons. For one, it was based on a false narrative and justification. And the resolution also gives the president essentially a blank check to take whatever action he deems necessary in Vietnam, even though there were members of Congress at the time who were already questioning the validity of the government's account on the alleged Gulf of Tonkin attacks. So for the bulk of the Vietnam War, Congress, constitutionally the only branch who can declare war, handed over the reins to LBJ for better or for worse. In this case, it's for worse. The ensuing escalation of soldiers in Vietnam, the unpopularity of the war, and ultimately the complete failure of the US to stop the spread of communism in the region can now be attributed to one person, President Johnson. I don't actually believe that any historical event can be attributed to a single person, but with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, that narrative was set. The ensuing conflict in Vietnam would come out of the executive branch, and if it worked, the president would get the glory, but if it didn't, well, we'll see. So suddenly, this civil war between the communist North and the anti-communist South became Americanized. By the end of 1964, there were 16,000 US troops in Vietnam, and by 1965, just 1 year later, there were 180,000. By 1969, over 500,000. This escalation of troops coincided with Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign of the North that lasted 3 years and dropped 750,000 tons of bombs on North Vietnam. Now, there are plenty of podcasts, books, documentaries, and movies out there that will teach you about the Vietnam War in depth. For now, just know that it was brutal. Not only was the US fighting the North Vietnamese military, but we were also fighting guerrilla forces in the South known as the Viet Cong. Remember that many people across South Vietnam liked Ho Chi Minh. Many of them became essentially underground fighters, supporting the North Vietnamese through covert operations and secret attacks, often occurring at night. By day, the VC passed as South Vietnamese civilians, making it incredibly difficult for the US military to know who was with them and who might be secretly against them. And we gave the Vietnamese plenty of reasons to be against us. The US military used napalm, the sticky, long-burning substance first developed to subdue Japan during World War II, in astounding numbers. We sprayed 20 million gallons of various deadly herbicides, most famously Agent Orange, to strip the leaves from the jungles so we could root out the enemy fighters. And importantly, so much of this war was televised for a national audience back home. And considering many Americans didn't understand why we had gotten involved in Vietnam's independence movement to begin with, coupled with the brutal tactics and the dubious justifications by the government, anti-war protests that had already existed in the early 1960s erupted into an almost revolution by the mid to late 60s. Young Americans burned draft cards, students on college campuses called out their universities for supporting research and development that fed into the military-industrial complex, and Black heroes like Muhammad Ali sacrificed their fame and careers to speak out against a war that was sending Black men disproportionately. You see, of the most enduringly problematic aspects of the Vietnam War on the home front, one of the most was the draft system. While in previous conflicts, especially World War II, young Americans were lining up to serve. In Vietnam, young men were doing everything they could to avoid going to war. And draft exemptions for college students meant that anyone wealthy enough to go to college and stay there until hopefully the war was over didn't have to go fight. Medical exemptions meant that anyone privileged enough to have a family doctor who could say you had bone spurs, for example, didn't have to fight. Young, mostly white men, often products of their parents' GI Bill benefits, went off to college and chose degrees like law and medicine that would keep them at school for as long as possible. Meanwhile, poor young men, especially men of color, who were finally being granted the privilege of fighting in a fully desegregated military, often had no way to avoid the draft. Johnson knew, even during his presidency, that the Vietnam War was going to overshadow any other part of his legacy, but he still believed that the Vietnam War was winnable. I mean, it had to be. The US had never lost a war before. We don't talk about the Korean War. It was a tie. So was the War of 1812. And we were the freaking United States, armed with the most advanced and terrifying weapons in human history, fighting against agrarian peasants barely free from their colonial era. The US general in charge of Vietnam bragged, even in 1967, the enemy's hopes are bankrupt. It wasn't until 1968 that it started to become clear, even to Johnson, what a mistake, a quagmire, Vietnam had become. Because early in this election year, while our government was assuring the public that the tide was turning and communists were close to surrender, in the middle of the night during the Lunar New Year holiday known as Tet in Vietnam, the North Vietnamese launched the largest coordinated attack of either side of the war up until that point. 80,000 troops attacked 100 different towns and cities at the same time, including the southern capital of Saigon. Although the US was eventually able to quell the attacks, like in some places only after 2 months of intense fighting, the Tet Offensive was a clear sign that the US government was wrong about the Vietnam War. Walter Cronkite, the trusted voice from the nightly news, who up until that point had been an optimistic believer in the government's confidence in Vietnam, broadcast from the war zone just weeks after the initial Tet Offensive attack, saying famously, "It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. It is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could." It wasn't long after Tet that LBJ shocked the nation by announcing that he would no longer be running for president. He knew that his legacy had been too tainted by the Vietnam War to do any more good. And let me remind you, he did a ton of good. Go back and watch my video on his domestic agenda. Now, we're going to come back to Vietnam in future episodes because, of course, the war didn't end with Johnson's presidency. It's going to take 7 more years, longer than LBJ's time as president, before the US will fully withdraw from Vietnam under Nixon. But that's a story for another day. Back in the year 1968, for a while it looked like JFK's younger brother, a true progressive, Bobby Kennedy, might get the Democratic nomination. But he was assassinated by a Palestinian angry with Kennedy's support for Israel in the recent Six-Day War. In the end, LBJ's vice president, Hubert Humphrey, was the nominee, and he was beaten by Richard Nixon. And then America was whole again, and there was no more division or government conspiracies, and the 1970s will be just great. To be continued. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe, and join patreon.com/antisocialstudies.